Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are jumping right into an absolute masterclass in visual storytelling. We're going to uncover the hidden mechanics of pure cinematic suspense and explore how one of the most famous styles in filmmaking history was actually born out of pure necessity. If you've ever found yourself literally glued to the edge of your seat during a thriller, well, you are about to find out exactly how that psychological tension is engineered. Let's get into it.
Okay, think about this incredibly provocative quote for a second. In many of the films now being made, there is very little cinema. They are mostly what I call photographs of people talking. Wow, talk about a sharp critique, right? It suggests that the invention of synchronized sound in movies might have actually jeopardized the perfection of pure cinema. To understand why relying on dialogue might be a huge step backward for visual storytelling, we need to go back to a time before actors could simply open their mouths and tell you what they were thinking.
Part 1. The first true Hitchcock film, Problem-Solving in the Silent Era. To really grasp what true cinematic style is, we have to look at the constraints of early filmmaking. It's such a fascinating period because the absolute lack of sound forced directors to come up with wildly inventive visual solutions.
Imagine this. You drop right into a movie and experience a 15-minute opening sequence without a single spoken word. Picture a winter afternoon in London, and it starts abruptly with the terrifying image of a screaming blonde victim. To make this image completely unforgettable, they used a sheet of glass. The actress's head was placed right on it, her hair spread out to fill the frame, and then they lit it from below, straight through the glass. Her light hair practically glows. It grips you immediately, relying purely on the power of the image.
Following that shocking opening, notice how the tension mounts perfectly through these purely visual steps of communication. We don't hear a detective explaining the crime. Instead, we watch the panic spread organically. First, a teletype machine frantically taps out a warning. Then, we see the concerned reactions of people reading the news in exclusive clubs. We see folks huddled around silent radios, then flashing electric signs broadcasting the killer's motives, and finally, evening newspapers hitting the streets. We learn the whole shebang about this serial killer, that he targets blondes, that he strikes on Tuesdays, all without a single line of exposition.
Now here's a massive real-world roadblock creators faced when crafting these suspenseful stories. Let's say you're adapting a story where a mysterious lodger might be a notorious killer, but you cast a massive, beloved star like the British matinee idol Ivor Novello. Because of the star system back then, a leading man of that stature simply could not be revealed as a vicious villain. The producers would literally never allow it, so this casting reality forced a massive narrative shift.
And that exact constraint birthed one of the most legendary storytelling tools in cinematic history, the innocent man accused. By making the hero innocent, it allows us, the audience, to intensely identify with an ordinary person who is suddenly plunged into a terrifying, out-of-the-ordinary situation. It gives us a much greater sense of danger because we can't help but think, man, that could be me.
To make this tension work right from the jump, you absolutely have to build the atmosphere first, and the number 15 here is critical. In that early defining film, the leading man's entrance was held back for 15 full minutes. By the time he finally knocks on the door, wrapped up in a black cloak, the visual dread, the heavy shadows, and the atmospheric terror of the city were already completely locked in.
So our mysterious character is finally introduced. He's up in his rented room, pacing nervously. The family below is terrified, wondering if he's the killer. But here's the puzzle. How on earth do you show the heavy, ominous sound of footsteps when you literally have no sound? The solution was absolute genius. They built a custom plate glass floor. The camera was placed underneath, looking straight up at him, pacing back and forth, while the chandelier in the room below physically sways with his heavy steps. It's a brilliant, completely visual translation of auditory suspense.
Part 2. The Psychology of Suspense, Visualizing Metaphors. Let's see how this visual language builds into deeper psychological territory, using everyday props and framing to tell a hidden story.
Think about the climax of a classic thriller where our hero is backed against iron railings by an angry mob. As we analyze this genre, we have to ask about a recurring visual motif. Why do characters constantly end up in handcuffs? It happens all the time.
Well, it brilliantly illustrates the deeper implications at play. Handcuffs aren't just a convenient police prop to move the plot forward. They're the most immediate, concrete symbol of a total loss of freedom. Beyond that, they evoke deep psychological vulnerability and themes of restraint. And when a character is lifted up by a mob with their arms bound together, it can even intentionally evoke the tragic sacrificed figure of Christ. That is a single, entirely visual prop doing massive psychological heavy lifting.
Part 3. The art of pure cinema. Show, don't tell. As these techniques evolved, filmmakers learned to replace clunky exposition with incredibly subtle visual touches that just charge the screen with emotion.
Here is a perfect example. Consider a scene where a man proposes marriage, and the woman tells him she'll call him at midnight with her answer. Instead of cutting to the couple on the phone and listening to them talk, we cut to a random switchboard operator at midnight. She's reading a book, a light blinks on her board, she plugs in the line and listens through her earphones. Slowly, she puts her book down, her face completely captivated by the conversation she's overhearing. We don't see the couple, we don't hear a single word of the proposal. The entire emotional weight is beautifully conveyed just by watching a stranger's fascinated reaction.
Oh, and here is another genius visual shortcut. Picture a party after a boxing match. The champion pours bubbly, vibrant champagne, ready to toast the woman he loves. But then he looks around and realizes she isn't there. She's actually out with his rival. Cut back to the glass, the champagne is gone completely flat. This single visual touch of bubbly versus flat champagne replaces pages of dramatic dialogue to instantly communicate profound heartbreak. Or consider how you show the passage of time and a character's rising success. You definitely don't need a narrator saying, "1 year later." Instead, you show a street poster advertising fights. In the spring, with blossoms on the trees, his name is in tiny print to the bottom. We cut to summer, his name is in medium text. Autumn, it's large text. By winter, with snow falling behind the billboard, he is the headliner in massive letters. It's a beautiful, organic timeline achieved entirely through visual elements. Now, to pull off these visual metaphors, camera placement is literally everything. The camera must be moved inside the action to generate a specific emotion. And it's absolutely vital to note that this shouldn't just be a gratuitous trick. You don't put a camera inside a refrigerator looking out just for a wacky angle. It must serve a strictly utilitarian purpose to pull the audience into the psychological reality of the scene.
Speaking of utilitarian purposes, get this fun fact. Did you know the legendary director cameos, which became a total staple of suspense films, started purely as a utilitarian fix? Early on, there simply weren't enough extras on set to fill a newsroom screen, so the director just sat in the background to populate the frame. It later became a superstition and eventually a famous gag, carefully placed in the first 5 minutes of the film so the audience wouldn't be distracted looking for it later on.
Part 4. The Tragedy of Sound. The Death of Pure Cinema. By the end of the silent era, visual storytelling was soaring. It was nearing absolute perfection. But then, an industry-shattering technological shift happened that changed the game forever.
The introduction of synchronized sound. Overnight, it forced the motion picture into a highly theatrical form. The perfection of pure cinema, where stories were told purely through the camera lens and editing rhythms, was suddenly jeopardized. Because it was now possible to just have actors stand there and explain everything out loud, mediocrity kind of crept back into mainstream filmmaking. The camera stopped telling the story and instead just recorded those photographs of people talking.
But the true masters of the craft knew better. They realized that to create a truly captivating, suspenseful story, you have to stick to the rules of pure cinema. Rely more on visual elements than dialogue. Clearly separate the dialogue from the visual action in the screenplay. Use dialogue only as an absolute last resort when visual communication is impossible. And above all, you must always charge that screen rectangle with emotion. Which leaves us with this final, provocative question to chew on. Did the addition of sound actually hold back the evolution of visual storytelling? The next time you watch a modern thriller, pay close attention. Are you watching a masterclass in visual suspense, or are you just looking at photographs of people talking? Keep an eye out for those subtle visual cues, the swaying chandeliers, and the flat champagne. I promise you, it will completely change the way you experience movies. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.